Hello. In the previous video I talked about the good characteristics of requirement statements. Now in this one I'll be talking about the good characteristics of requirements collections, not necessarily just a single statement but a collection. Okay, it's like a document or a repository. Okay, let's start. Now you might remember also that we discussed about characteristics. There were 7 characteristics. You have some sort of a list for the good characteristics of the requirements as well, like completeness, like consistency, like modifiability, and finally traceability. Now we have 4 here. Let's start with the completeness and consistency. Now again, in fact, like the case for the requirement statements, here we also have the completeness coming into to our front. So what this means is that in fact essentially no requirement or necessary information should be absent. That's what we kind of expect from a requirements collection of requirements. Although in practice you will almost never be able to document every single requirement for any system, I must admit, but you have to at least there are almost always some assumed or implied or implicit requirements, but you still have to do your best about completeness. Consistency. Now there should be no conflict with other requirements of the same type or with higher level business, user or system requirements. That is consistency. So a requirement statement should be consistent. I mean, if one requirement say X and the other one conflicting saying something Y, then that's obviously a conflicting or inconsistency. But not among requirements. We also expect requirements to be consistent with the higher order particularly higher order requirements as well, like system requirements, business or user requirements. Right. Fine, that's consistency. 2 very important characteristics of requirements repositories or collections. The other one is modifiability, maintainability, if you like. So how can you ensure modifiability or maintainability? One of the best ways is to avoid stating requirements redundantly in multiple places. So you have to either link related requirements or use hierarchy to group them. Okay? The reason for that is that as a change, I mean, if you change something here, then you don't want or those requirements that you think would be influenced, you would want to spot them immediately. If you put the same type of requirement here in section 1 and then section 6, if they're kind of similar or the same, if you change this one, we know that requirements will change, by the way. It's very, very likely that requirements will change. So if you change this one, it's very likely that you miss something that is very much related. Okay, so either put them in a kind of a you establish a traceability. That's why we'll see, in fact, traceability. We do that. But one of the things that you should immediately do something about is that you should either use a hierarchy or avoid whatsoever stating similar requirements in multiple places. Okay. So uniquely labeling, expressing a requirement separately from others so you can refer to it unambiguously, that's one of the ways to handle it. And I mean, you can always rewrite a requirement, but in a large and complex project you should maintain a history of changes made to each requirement, especially after they are baseline. And in such projects you would better use a requirements management tool, which we'll see in lecture let's say in the last lecture, in fact. Traceability. Now when we are talking about traceability, we are referring to kind of establishing links between requirements or between other parts of the other components, other concepts in the development life cycle. We can mention about 2 types of traceability, 2 main types of traceability. One is the vertical traceability, and in the vertical traceability we can talk about 2 types, backward and forward. Backward to the origin of the requirements, meaning like business requirements or user requirements or system requirements, or forward to the derived requirements or to the design elements, code, tests, and so on. Okay, so backward and forward traceability. I mean, if you establish traceability throughout the entire life cycle, that is what engineering is. Okay, I must admit that this is a good practice for relatively large projects. I mean, if you're talking about very small projects, it might be quite, let's say, tedious to establish traceability, particularly if forward traceability, or we'll see horizontal traceability. In some places, in some kind of projects, it might be a little bit difficult. But if you're really seriously talking about like large industrial projects, then you have to do that. You have to establish traceability. Horizontal traceability is, on the other hand, we're talking about establishing traceability links between the requirements in the same collection. Okay, why do you establish traceability in the first place? It helps finding missing or unnecessary requirements. It helps understanding the impact of a change. As I mentioned, we know the requirements will change. So what we'd like to have is to avoid inconsistency. I mean, if you have a kind of traceability between requirements, we'll be able to understand if you change something here, then you'd be able to know which other type of requirement, which other requirements are likely to change because of this change as well. That is also one of the ways to handle change and still be consistent. So 4 characteristics, good characteristics, or let's say the collection itself should be complete, should be consistent, should be modifiable, maintainable, and should be traceable. Fine, that is the end of this module. Let's move to the last module, how to write good requirements statements. See you there.